was paid for by the government of Punjab, so I really should have the government of Punjab logo on it. Um, it was on a very simple question on why property taxes are so low in the Punjab. Um, and so I'm going to go raise a couple of behavioral points for a couple of players so that to keep it focused. But what I do sort of want to say is that and I come back to this towards the end, but I want to make this point in the beginning. Contrary to what some of our colleagues have said, um, taxation, most of all, is a political issue at the end of the day. And to talk about nudges or whatever you want to talk about, if it's not done with politicians at some point who have to take the decisions on taxation, is for me as a political scientist a non-starter. Um, so I'll just use this, I guess. So we deliberate on two behavioral insights, mainly based on my research, which is one is on property tax administration and the government's levels of government, uh, even within the same department, even within the same office, it's not a monolith. There are as many governments as people within a particular office, because people who translate policy into administration and is what, how that is done and what policy is actually implemented is actually the real policy, right? So when it comes to tax policy, you have to see how it's going to get administered or implemented. The other behavioral insight that I talk about is of the behavior of provincial governments when it comes to property tax. I think, and my sort of personal sort of insight into that is almost villainous. All right. So the broader framework, and people have talked about it, so I'm not going to go too deeply into it. I think you're running my sort of old presentation, not the new one. That's my fault. But I mean, keep at it. We'll do it. So one is people have talked about this is over reliance on transfers and loans, and that's probably the federal government at a certain extent, obviously loans, provinces, mostly money coming from the federal government. We talked about it, and dipping into loans. So what you call a soft budget constraint, right? Local governments can't raise loans, but are very much reliant on higher level transfers. We have a very low tax to GDP ratio. Cycles are always talking about revenues, but tax to GDP is probably hovering around less than 10% right now. With the provinces, we don't even have estimates, which is a big issue if you want to talk about subnational taxation, because you don't have a comparator. You cannot compare provinces with each other. You cannot compare good practices across countries. So for my work, I had used at some point, the World Bank has started doing GDP figures for the provinces. So you could start sort of measuring or getting some estimates and doing. So I did property tax to ratio GDP for my work, and Punjab, which is by far the best property, within inverted commas, property tax collector in the country, the figure was coming out to be about less than 0.1% of the GDP, which is less than 5 to 6 times of the average of developing countries, which is about 0.6% of GDP. So when my colleagues in the property tax department tell me, "Ji, hamari to 2 se 20 billion chali gayi hai," it's probably not moved an inch, even a decimal on the tax to GDP ratio. And I would risk saying the same perhaps to our sales tax colleagues. Okay, so unless you have that figure, and FPR suffers from the same issue, that they don't talk, the billions and trillions mein chali gayi. You have not moved at all. You have not moved the needle on anything, right? So a big nudge to the government is, please talk about tax to GDP ratios, because anything else is very superficial and doesn't solve anything. So the same framework of over-reliance and then the history of receding taxation, we probably, you see, you talk about land revenue. India was run on the basis of land revenue. Colonial extraction here took on the basis of land revenue. Um, I, as an agriculturist, pay for the same amount of income, which I'm not going to tell you, but 10 times less tax on my income from agriculture compared to my income from my salary. That is not fair on the salaried class. Agriculture, which is a huge source of provincial tax, direct tax base, needs to start paying tax. Um, it, and it should be treated as tax from any other source of income. It is being treated differently. So that's the other nudge from the province. Uh, Things are changing within same framework. You have over reliance. Well, your big brother you're over reliant on is running out of money, so that's going to flip. So provinces will have to start making their own money, because they're going to have very little money after their so a lot of happening there. Very quickly, property tax is a good tax for a number of reasons. A, it is a local government tax. It is very simple to, relatively simple to collect for local governments, especially when you have IT and all. It is a steady source of tax. It does not change with changing GDP or your economy growing. It's a fairly stable source of tax. Because it is collected or at the local government level and spent at that level also, which might or might not happen in Pakistan's case, as that is we talked about it, but it gives you a very small sort of fiscal loop, so which tightens the reciprocity and the fiscal sort of loop angle to it, which perhaps could lead to better compliance on the tax and a better social contract with the government. There's the tax collectors and various tiers within the tax collectors, then the provincial and the local governments. Is the behavior needs to be studied when it comes to it. Taxpayers, I won't go into that now, but anybody who's a taxpayer wants to pay less than more. They want to have something in return, reciprocity, have predictability of the tax, especially property tax, which is not deducted from your income or from anything that you buy at the POS, right? It goes from your pocket. So it's one of the most unpopular taxes globally. All right. They need transparency. They need elements of fairness, and all this leads into the literature on tax compliance. Tells you more about it. So this is my number one insight, where property tax intervention. I feel I found in my research to be a tension between the higher levels of the tax department, the secretary and the DG and the regional directors, and the lower tiers, which are the ETOs, the tax inspector, what you call the field level staff or the street bureaucrats. And then there's a whole story about the interface of these lower tiers with the taxpayer itself, right? So there's two portions to it. I just talk about one portion, which is the higher tier, which I've talked about. The secretary who's supposed to do policy, DG, implementation, regional directors, a bit of both supervision, first assessment of appeals. And so it's the gray bit and the light gray bit. Light gray bit is where the wheel sort of touches the road, right? Now, the lower staff I found have amazing levels of information, very rich in information. The constable knows every house, the occupant of every house, who he is related to, what he does for a living, is the house rented or not. So very information rich, right? Uh, the so they have this information, they hold it, and they manipulate it. Okay. Acha. Then, because they are the ones who's also the assessors and the collectors of the tax, they exercise discretion fully. I mean, I find them using more authority than a federal secretary. They're wonderful, right? they know what the authority is and they use it to the fullest. I also found that they're not the most corrupt, as we call it. I actually don't use the word corruption in my book. They share rents, right? And they also run the department. The department does not give them money to print stationery. It does not give them money for their motorcycle fuel. It does not give them money to run their offices. They sometimes are so much lacking in staff, short of staff, that they hire private people to do their number work and their office work and stuff like that, right? So the same, you've heard of patwaris, hiring patwaris to do their work. So there's a whole different discussion on how actually the government is running in Pakistan by the lower tiers. It is running through rents because the government does not capacitate its lower tiers. So वो एक Balochistan में, we had served there for 5 years initially, had learned huge life lessons there. So we had a senior officer tell a colleague of mine, which really became I always quoted, he was complaining about the low salary and all that, young officer in the civil service, and this old, gentleman nearing retirement, he said, okay, what are you complaining about? The government तुम्हें job भी दे और फिर तनख्वाह भी दे, right? So living off the land, and it's not a new concept. It's like, for your benefit, it's like you get a job and then you want a salary as well. So this living off the land is kind of incorporated in the way the civil service and the lower tiers were designed even initially. It's not that they might have slipped down a little further because it is a slippery slope, but they were designed. या आपको नंबरदारी मुरब्बे और ये डीसीओ के साथ बड़े बड़े जो रकबे मिलते थे घरों के, जो ग्रीन फीस आती थी, ये well, there's a whole system to it, which was part of the colonial extraction. Okay. Anyway, so what IT has now done is broken that sort of monopoly of information. Visibility आ गई है ऊपर वालों को. ऊपर वाले क्या कर रहे थे and still do is that they use authority. They don't have information. It's obfuscated at lower tiers. They use that authority. Authority is, okay, how much are you going to give me from your region? And in a high level meeting, and we experienced those meetings. And he said, sir, X. He said, no, I want Y. Who's going to give me Y? You are RD now. So transfers and postings, which now Adnan and our friend Asim have got on to that after the first experiment, and Mehman will talk about it. Transfers and posting in absence of information was the key management tool for the higher tiers. And the same was happening later on even to the circle level. So in absence of, और आप नौकरी से तो अपने PN को भी नहीं निकाल सकते. And I say in my book, it's easier to fire a prime minister in Pakistan than a PN, which is true, right? So data and its use, better control and management. Areas, सेठों की तरह दो किताबें. They had 2 books on areas. एक अपनी थी घर की, एक सरकारी किताब थी. Total manipulations. Areas का पता ही नहीं था government. So now it's coming into the system, it's slowly sort of following up and all that. So that is one kind of behavior and behavioral change driven by IT, incentives, this, that, whatever you want to do. So IT, when it comes to IT, can enable the government have visibility, especially for new developments, who's going to be in the cadastre, who not. Pehle ye bhi nahi tha. There were huge amounts of houses which were not part of the cadastre because koi visibility high tier ko thi nahi. Acha, then direct interaction, it reduces the direct interaction, which is key in taxation, is to minimize direct interaction between the taxpayer or jahan assessor or collector ek hai and then the taxpayer. Okay. So maybe the provinces can tell us about the status of where we are in IT interventions, the status of these things, then separate the assessment and collection functions. Then IT, and this is a la Umar Saif, we make an IT application to everything with no change in business process reviews at the back. पीछे तो वही बापू सुल्तान बैठा, ठीक है, आगे आप एप्पल रख दें बेशक, right? It's not going to change the way the government functions. We have tried it in Punjab for 10 years. Some things did change, but not many. Anyway, educated taxpayer, obviously we all agree on that and all that. So this is my first point. It's tax is a negotiated outcome between the state and the citizen. It has to be part of the fiscal contract, including reciprocity, accountability, transparency, all the nice words. If it, and normally we see it take, this is absent in Pakistan, by the first bit. It does take place जहाँ आपके state organized groups यहाँ आ जाती है, trader lobby आ गई, आपकी aptama आ गई, आपकी फलाने आ गए, and tariffs में as a commerce sort of employee, I've seen it. The whole country at times the policies are driven by one or two big industrialists. Happens all over the world. Nothing limited to Pakistan. But what does take place even today in Pakistan is the tax negotiation between the collector and the taxpayer in all the taxes. चाहे ऊपर कॉन्ट्रैक्ट हो या नहीं हो, उसने कहा भाई ये टैक्स देना है, उसने कहा अच्छा फिर गाल करके देना नहीं. It negotiation is key to tax collection. It is not a very binary sort of game, and it is not very black and white. Okay. And especially it becomes very important when there is absence of a state citizen contract. Now, what IT is doing in a lot of these places is disrupting that without really putting at the top tier. Okay. And I think some areas which are more tribal in nature will see the brunt of this. Actually, you should study the impact of IT without a social contract, because it would be interesting to use the term. All right. So this is one behavior to talk about. The second one, the main point I want to make is that in property tax, the revenues and the responsibilities it had to be a cooperative sort of tax collection, because आधे काम province कर रहा था, and when I was studying it, LGO 2001 चल रहा था, तो कुछ काम district government कर रही थी और कुछ काम जो था वो तहसील governments कर रही थी. So it was really an extreme case of what again exists and existed before the 2001. अभी भी वही है, और वो ये है कि जहाँ cooperation required थी, वहाँ there's two reasons I say that. Provinces, is it versus local governments? And one reason I get out of the way, because it's again political in nature, there's a lot of literature in context of Pakistan also, and generally globally written, that provincial politicians don't like local politicians. They don't like to empower financially local governments, local politicians. You see the cycles of local governments here. Every time we have an elected political government, no local government. Non-elected or dictatorial regimes, we get fresh local governments, laws and everything, because it's a whole there's a lot of literature written on it. I'll not go into it. I'll just come to the technical part of it, the what you call a perverse incentive. Ke tamam or policy that has to do with property tax, setting the tax rate, granting exemptions, the tax base, have to be taken by the provincial parliament, and hence they get the political hit for taking those unpopular decisions, right? While more than 80% of that money revenue has to go to the local government. So it's a misaligned incentive. Totally misaligned. If they're not getting the revenue, why should they take the political hit? Added to my previous argument, they don't like local governments for their own reason, right? So nudge, the only nudge I can think of, फिर उनकी administration भी, it's the provincial department that collects the tax. So उसकी liability assessment, billing, enforcement, all political decisions happen with the provincial department. So my biggest nudge here would be एक तो how IT, and why every time you go to the provincial government saying कि जी उनका tax उनको दे दे. And there's an interesting development in Sindh in 2022. They handed over this function of property tax collection to local governments, to local government department. So उन्होंने excise and taxation से ले, right. right? So there's need to the nudge there is you need to study good practices, who's leading on what tax where. It's important. I think Sindh has done something fantastic. First step is to change and given with the staff for 3 years, given it to local government. So how empowered the lower tiers are going to be, the actual local governments. Again, Sindh is a unique issue of province versus local government, right? It's a new, unique problem, and I hope they overcome and there's a settlement to it somehow. So how IT, so the main issue raised by the provinces is that local governments don't have capacity to do this. My comeback is always is okay, let them do or die then. If it comes with the hard budget constraint, right, so you're going to get this, and like you have in other countries, and raise the rest of it, right? We're going to pay the wage and wage for your people, but if you want any development program, want any projects, you have to raise your property tax and do it, right? So it has to be designed. It has to come with the PFC, right? Because it sort of intertwines. IT has given now an ease to decentralize the collection and policy making, especially on the tax. So some nudges I talk about in total ambit of provincial level is, and Umar I think delved into a lot. Uh, Provinces are expenditure machines. There's no, apart from the DS, there's only, if I remember, SO tax in finance is the highest level of officer, a section officer. There's nobody else talking about taxation. Okay. And the end of the budget, you pull in the departments and say, "Ki ji, kya hai?" So that unity of command or unification of the tax function has to be done at a higher level in the province. Then at also at the field level, you have somebody called a district collector who was primarily tasked to collect land revenue, has the cadastral record of the land revenue. You want to set up parallel functions, right? But there's no unity of command to get a revenue, somebody who's responsible for tax collection at this sub district or the district level. There's none. This is the last thing in the day's events that a collector does is they look at the revenue figures because there's no importance given along the hierarchy. So I'll stop there, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Pracha. This was an excellent overview, and I would recommend everyone here to read Dr. Pracha's book, or it's called "Property Taxes and State Incapacity in Pakistan." It's an eye-opening account of how this really works, what is really involved. So I personally learned a lot from his book, and I thank you for that. This is an excellent piece of work. Uh, let me now open this for discussion. I'm going to now introduce the panelists. So do we have Fayaz Ali Shah sab here? He had to leave. Okay, so let me start with the only excise and taxation representation we have here. Ahmed Saeed Saab is currently serving as Director Excise and Taxation Punjab, and he has over 26 years of experience in this premier tax collecting agency of Punjab, and he's been dealing with different taxes, duties, including property taxation. So Ahmed Saab, if you can just comment on overall what you feel about property taxation, and particularly the role of property taxes and excise department and local governments. How do you see that? Like there is this point that Dr. Pracha raised about incapacity of local governments, and that sort of is being a big challenge. So how does excise department see, because property taxation is something that we all talk about all the time, that we are not able to raise enough. And there is probably an argument that local governments could be empowered to sort of help excise department in facilitating the collection, or maybe establishing that benefit linkage that we talk about. कि अगर local government services provide कर रही हैं, then people can see कि चलो मेरे tax देने का कोई फायदा हो रहा है. So how do you see that coordination between excise department and local governments that can help us think more clearly about property tax? So over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, and thank Dr. Pracha Sahib for valuable presentation. I have gone through his book as well. Uh, I think what I have learned from 26 years, biggest nudge is required for our political elite. Every time we go to government, as Dr. Saab said, for resource mobilization, there are uh, dozens of presentations and proposals, but they are all turned down. I suppose that they don't want to have property tax in the province of Punjab. But going forward, yes, property tax primarily should be a local government tax. But we have made an experiment in 2001 when the tax was devolved. We gave away one district of Pakpatan to district government and two zones of Lahore to district government of Lahore, but they handed over it back after 1 year, uh, showing their incapacity to assess and collect tax, the property tax. Then we started collecting property tax from whole of the Punjab. So ideally, it should be with the local government, but prior to that, we have to build up an enhanced capacity of the local governments, which is not in place. Local governments are highly politicized at present. As Dr. Saab said, provincial authorities don't like local authorities. So tax collection is still with provincial authorities, departments. IT has improved a lot with the Dr. Saab sitting beside. We engaged urban unit 10 years ago. In those days, collection was 4.5 billion, and now it is 20 billion, more than 20 billion, due to IT interventions and minimizing discretion available with the field staff. Our colleague from BRA, he was very advocate of property tax with BRA. That may be an option, but as Dr. Saab said, it should be with the local government. Why property tax is low in Punjab and in Pakistan? It was only 2 or 2.5 billion in Sindh, whereas it is 20 billion more, or more in Punjab. Because it is a direct tax. Contrary to the PRA and tax on services, that is at source deduction. It is levied and collected through purchases even made by government departments. Main chunk is from I think आपके जो mobile companies हैं. It is very meager from restaurants, which is maybe a direct taxation. We go from door to door, knock every door, and then collect taxes. That is why it is not a popular tax. It can be improved by IT interventions and making people aware about the tax. Your question, how we can integrate it with the local government, it may be done. It can be integrated with water supply services. If the prop tax is in default, the water supply may be disconnected or some other services. So that's my take.
Thank you, Ahmed Said Saab. Let me now bring Dr. John Robert. And John, I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing your last name. Jelima, is it? Okay, perfect. He's a senior economist at World Bank. He has previously worked as poverty economist and social development specialist for the World Bank. And John, from what I know, you have done some work on local capacity, how to build those, thinking about the governance structure. So maybe if you can comment on those, given the problems of local government here that you've been talking about, what's your take and what's the bank take on developing the governance capacity here in Pakistan? So over to you.
Yeah, good. Thank you, and thank you also to all the esteemed members of the revenue authorities from the provinces and IGC and SEED and Adam Smith for inviting the World Bank to this engagement, to this event. I think it's incredible, first of all, that this is a conversation that's happening between the provinces, between the revenue authorities at the provinces, at their own initiative. And I think that the presenters have been very clear on what the problem is at the federal level, at the national level. Too little tax revenues are being raised, and the expenditure priorities in the current years and for the foreseeable future are skewed towards things that don't benefit large swaths of the population. So I think there is clearly a need for the provincial authorities to begin thinking about these issues. So I'm very happy to be a part of it, and I think there's also an opportunity now for provincial authorities to start thinking seriously about the changing profile of households and individuals in Pakistan as a whole, and to start thinking about how to take advantage of the desire of people in Pakistan to vote with their feet. So in a decentralized structure, there may be opportunities for an individual from Sindh in KPK, for example, that they wouldn't otherwise be able to take advantage of if the receiving environment in KPK wasn't set up to absorb an extra individual, so to say, from Sindh. And I think that the participation of the provincial authorities in this kind of in planning for, in thinking about not only population growth but internal migration from areas where economic activity has been increasing or is widely distributed, is equitably distributed. I think that this point in time provides a real opportunity for authorities to start developing both revenue policy as well as expenditure policy that takes advantage of this geographical shift in population and the shift from rural areas to urban areas. That does take a lot of careful planning, though, and I think this is, these sorts of interactions are the right sort of vehicle to begin planning along these lines. So I want to jump off a little bit from a discussion of the property tax, the urban immovable property tax in particular, and discuss more broadly the tax mix, both at the federal level or at the national level and at the provincial level. And I think that's where there's still a lot of work to be done, and I'm glad that the provincial authorities are taking the lead and thinking about these issues. So beyond simply revenue performance, or the share of tax revenues in GDP, or the share of provincial owned revenues in provincial owned GDP, the tax mix itself has distributional consequences and probably informs the social contract, as presenters have mentioned, in a way that can be beneficial or can be harmful. So in particular, the reliance on indirect taxes, the GST and VAT, excise taxes, and so on and so forth, and let's say the under-reliance or the underwhelming performance of things like the urban immovable property tax, the agricultural income tax, and direct taxes. I know that personal income taxes are not part of the provincial revenue authority's profile or scope, but nonetheless, the underdevelopment of personal income tax revenues means that, by and large, the average citizen in any particular province will be heavily taxed at the point of sale, at the point of consumption, and not so heavily taxed on sources of income. So direct taxes are relatively small. That's province-wide, but it's also at the national level. And I think that given how the discussion here today is evolving, and given the sort of institutional setups that we've just seen, that there does need to be a focus for provincial authorities to develop tax models or revenue models which are sensitive to the sorts of expenditure programs in the provinces, as well as sensitive to or able to generate a distributional angle to any particular tax mix or revenue policy province-wide. And again, it's surprising to me, it's shocking to me in a positive way that it's we here who are gathered to talk about taxes who are also thinking about things like the social contract and what a particular expenditure profile or expenditure plan means for tax collection or revenue collections over the course of a given year. It's clear that the reverse is not going to happen, right? It's not a two-way street. Those who are thinking about expenditures and the size of the development budget are not thinking about the sort of revenue impact that each of those, the revenue and distributional impacts that any particular development spending plan might have, or development spending budget might have. So I think it's incumbent again on the provincial authorities and maybe with the revenue authorities taking the lead to not only determine what kind of revenue profile, what sort of revenue magnitudes are necessary for any given development budget, but also what kind of distributional impact that particular revenue number or that revenue magnitude will have, and how to perhaps improve on that distributional impact. And that probably means, if it's true that local authorities who benefit from the bulk of, for example, the real estate tax revenues, are nonetheless don't have the capacity to administer and collect that tax by themselves, that probably indicates that those same local authorities also have weaker capacity to, for example, absorb large chunks of development spending. So there needs to be, I think, yes, capacity building at the local level. If we're serious about making local authorities and local governments responsible for the sorts of programs and revenue collections that are relevant for their areas, then I think there does need to be a better effort or concentrated effort, concerted effort to build capacity at the local level to manage both the revenue side and the expenditure side. I think they also don't like to suspect or to know that they're paying more than their neighbors. And that's true of individuals, that's true of firms. And I think keeping this information or taking advantage of the information that's generated at the local level can be instrumental in making sure that there is not only vertical equity in the tax system, and that is people who earn more pay more, but also horizontal equity. And that ties together with issues of transparency and accountability. That's also issues of transparency and accountability on the expenditure side. And again, it pleases me a great deal that we here talking about revenues or nominally talking about revenues are also talking about what's going on the expenditure side and state capacity more generally to deliver things, to deliver important services equitably, fairly, and such that in a way that generates broad-based support for continued public service delivery. And I think that goes a long way also to making sure that the social contract is healthy enough to accommodate, for example, a provincial authority or a local authority indicating that they would like to raise more revenues from, for example, the UIPT in order to finance better irrigation or improved operations and maintenance on irrigation networks, if those are relevant for that particular area. So I think those are the points that I wanted to cover, and I think I hope that in that I've also indicated that yes, the World Bank's position is that not just national level policies and politics which matter, but in fact increasingly we see or we anticipate that more and more of the sorts of successes in Pakistan, as well as the challenges and potentially failures, will be specific to province, or province by province will be different in important contexts from, for example, any kind of national level success or challenge. So I'll stop there, and thanks again to everybody who's taken the time to be here. I very much appreciate it. I hope too that this is not the last of these sorts of events, but the first. Hope there's many more to come.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you.
Quick couple of points, and I think the point raised by our colleague from World Bank resonated with probably all of us, that this low capacity issue, and I think it works both ways. And if we look at the way the sales tax on services growth, if we take the absolute number, which Mujtaba doesn't like, so in the same way, probably property tax has the same potential as well if it's designed properly and if we take it forward. Just to clarify, I think that the subnational taxation is really the domain of, in FCDO is the domain of subnational governance program, and we have Naveed Aziz, the SRO for that program with us. We support subnational taxation at SEED in terms of like behavioral insights, and kind of we work together, but I think they are already in KP and Punjab, and I think Sindh and Balochistan revenue authorities should also push them to get their program to Balochistan and Sindh. I think one point I wanted to talk about, which was earlier made on by our Baloch Saab from the chairman Balochistan Revenue Authority, which resonated a lot, was how these revenue authorities, which were not typical government departments, they all, I think we agree on, they performed very, very well post this 18th amendment. And that also brings us to the point that we have, for example, CEO Pakistan Single Window with us, we have CEO Urban Unit with us, that how these new organizations who are a bit like, I would not say typical government departments, are actually performing differently, and whether there are some things for us to learn from how these organizations behaved when they went into a bit different setup from the traditional government department. So this is something I think I would like to learn as we go forward into our next session on digital transformation, in which Mansoor Saab would be probably contributing. And also in the last session on beneficial taxation, where we will again see probably how technology and how technology is helping bridge some of these issues for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Umar. Let me now bring. I think it's a good time to bring Naveed Saab into the discussion. Naveed Aziz Saab, is he part of this? Great. Naveed Saab, if you can just add to what Umar has been saying about the role FCDO is playing. But formally, Naveed Aziz Saab is a senior governance advisor at FCDO. He has also served as governance advisor at DFID and worked at the Rural Support Programs Network. So it's a pleasure to have you, Naveed Saab. Please, over to you.
Thank you very much. I think there's hardly anything left for me to say after Mujtaba Saab's presentation, and thank you, Umar, for putting me on the spot. I think the only benefit that I see of my name being included in the list of the panelists is that I have the monopoly over the mic for next 3 to 5 minutes. Otherwise, I think really not much to share in terms of technicalities of this very enriching discussion. So we can continue to debate a lot of these issues that Dr. Mujtaba Pracha Saab has raised in terms of how taxes can be, what could be the value base. There's a lot of debate in terms of shifting from rental value to capital value, and I think Punjab has experimented something on these lines in terms of taxing properties which are abutting highways, who are not part of the urban areas, but they are next to highways. So there is a different modality of assessing the value. So that is one reform area that I think a lot of provinces are moving towards. And then we can discuss what could be the optimum rate, what could be the business processes, role of IT that a lot of people have talked about. But if I think we take a macro picture, political economy of things that Dr. Mujtaba Saab has also touched upon, capacities are a constraint, and capacities I think are varied across different organizations. We have some excellent organizations emerging, Pakistan Single Window, Urban Unit, but I think largely our civil service is not fit for purpose, including civil service of taxes or tax administrations. We are still living in, I think, 19th century, and Pracha Saab has talked about colonial extraction. So I think a lot of us know that is still continuing. And this is how living off the land is the that is the default position, especially for lower tiers. This whole debate and discussion would remain incomplete if we also do not talk about civil service reform. And we know the root and branch civil service reform is perhaps impossible, at least in our lifetimes. We have seen different iterations of attempts at civil service reform, but what can be done for changing the organizational cultures and processes? And this is why I think it's really an interesting, could be an interesting case study that Umar has also mentioned. That what is it that differentiates PRAs from Excise and Taxation Department? A lot of us know about our own informal connections with businesses, with agriculturists, with property owners. It's an entirely different experience walking into an office of PRA and an office of an Excise and Taxation Department. So that determines the culture, the ways and workings of those departments, and what is their ethos. The ethos, I think, is not, I'm afraid to say, not facilitating the client. It's putting his or her life in a misery. That is the ethos, and extracting the last pound of flesh that those departments can extract for their own benefit, or as well as for the benefit of the state. So that, I think, is at one of the causes of why we see this suboptimal behavior, suboptimal performance. So the equilibrium needs to be reset. That, I think, is the larger question. Of course, there are both sides of this debate and coin, political as well as technical, and they also interact with each other. They cannot be a binary choice between the two all the time. What partners like us can do is to nudge governments to take some policy positions which are perhaps better technically than other positions that they are currently adhering to. But I think we probably, development partners cannot really influence the big politics or the politics of reforms as much as Pakistan's own system can. So those reforms stick, which are really thought through by internal stakeholders. We can only assist. So that is why I think, and this is where our effort has also been. Umar mentioned the subnational governance program, and we are, I think, relatively happy to support KP and Punjab, Excise and Taxation Department, as well as PRAs, and especially in Excise. So plans are ready to transition to new valuation basis, but it is a political question. So as my colleague from Excise Department has said, at least I have seen several policy proposals being prepared by Excise Department in Punjab, some of them with our help, some of them with other development partners, and most of them homegrown. This really good experimentation on taxing properties abutting highways is government's own initiative. This is not some development partners, was not part of any development partners program. Unfortunately, that has been stopped by the courts, but for the time it worked well. Maybe we can expand that. So the point that I was coming to is plans are ready, good technical plans and proposals. They just need the final push, and this is where I think people like Mushtaba Paraja Saab, who's really well plugged in the system, both politically as well as administratively. Maybe we need to find more Parachas in the system. Unplugged at the moment. Well, politics with the small p, not with the big P. So I think this is where I would really like a lot of these policy debates to happen. And another thing which has been also mentioned is people who are working at the first tier of these departments. Prasad has mentioned. Maybe we can have more sessions with them. A lot of these faces who are at the policy making. Well, PRAs may be unique, but other departments, Excise is certainly pays the price. It's the turnover of senior policymakers. You go to any secretary's office now, I think it has now come down to perhaps a matter of weeks, if not, used to be years, then it was months, and now it's weeks. The time a secretary spends in some of these departments. So what kind of policy debate do you expect them to engage in? They don't have the bandwidth, the space, the time, or they don't want to, I think, waste their political and social capital in these things. So that's another incentive that we should be mindful of. I'm not saying these things are easy, but at least there has to be a start. Thank you.
Thank you, Naveed. Just one thing which I want to pick off from what Naveed Saab said and what has been said earlier as well. I think we talk about bringing in many other stakeholders, but we really need to bring in the judiciary into this. They do not understand, the decisions they're taking, the economic basis of that, or so especially when they litigate on taxation issues. And I think this is something that in one earlier iteration of NSFCDO program, the reform effort that I was involved in, we did include trying to make them a bit more economically literate. But I think we really need to work on this. That's a point that I would take away from this workshop. One of the things we need to work on.
Thank you. Let me now move on to our next official panelist on this speaker, Hina Sheikh. Hina is a senior country economist for International Growth Center, Pakistan. She has over 15 years experience in the development sector and worked with reputable international NGOs and multilateral organizations. And she has managed multiple development projects in various capacities. So Hina, in your sort of rich experience in the development world, how do you see property taxes compliance, and what are some of the ways we can solve all the sort of, not all, but maybe some of maybe make some progress towards addressing these issues that we've been discussing? Over to you.
Thank you, Sharafgan. So, Assalamu alaikum, everyone. I'm just going to basically since I'm the spokesperson for IGC over here, and we fund policy-focused research. So in light of all that has already been presented and discussed, and a lot has been, so there's not much left for me to really contribute here. But there are just a couple of things that I would like to highlight, that these could be some areas that we could work more in terms of improving the performance of property tax. So I think Mujtaba Saab very clearly laid out the gaps in state capacity that keep property tax from performing at its highest potential, and he discussed behavioral insights with respect to two key players, the collectors and the administrators and the provincial governments. So he also highlighted the tension between these players and how IT can help bridge the gap and enable local governments, especially, to play their designated role. So I think it's very important to see what the behavioral insights, who they're focusing on. I think Sherafgan started the presentation by saying that, whose role are we trying to change? Is it the tax collector or the taxpayer, or is it the service provider? So for instance, the use of IT can be leveraged to empower local governments to improve compliance, and it can enhance their perceived role. It can establish their role as a service provider, and it can eventually lend them the power they need to, strengthen their mandate to collect taxes. So, for example, data and IT can be, and there's an example of a project that we funded in Liberia that IGC funded, and they basically used IT and data to manipulate the perception amongst property owners and taxpayers of the capacity of the government to penalize them for non-compliance. So, a simple change like just sending out tax notices with the name of the property owner and a photograph of the property and information on what their penalties are for non-compliance, for example, tripled tax registration and payment. So these are certain things that give this perception that the government has the capacity, it knows, where you're going wrong. And while they're important to improve the role of the local government, it can, and we've spoken at length about improving evaluation, assessment, etc. I think, and we've spoken about enforced compliance as well. I think we should also talk about voluntary compliance and how we can improve that. And I think somehow we haven't focused much on that so far. And I think, first of all, it's important to understand why there is low compliance in the first place, right? So it can do, one set of problems relates to simple things that have to do with the structure of the tax, about exemptions, weak enforcement, about the overall sort of tax rate, for instance. But there's another set of problems which has to do with your tax morale, right? Are you willing to pay the taxes? Is there reciprocity? Is there some kind of pair effects? Do you want some social recognition for paying taxes, or you feel that there are going to be sanctions placed against you if you don't pay taxes. And then also there are a lot of information imperfections as well. There are misunderstandings of what you're meant to pay, what you're not meant to pay, and these need to be clarified. So I think here the critical need is to improve the knowledge and understanding of the system, and I feel like educating the taxpayers is something very critical, and it's a low hanging fruit that we really need to leverage. There was a survey that was done. I don't know, Umar Saab, if you were part of it. I think Dr. Chima ke saath, there was a survey of taxpayers. It was done in 2022, in which basically just to assess their understanding of the tax system. So there were about 604 property taxpayers. They were asked. They belonged to low, medium, and high density areas, and the survey revealed a very poor understanding of the tax system. So about more than 90% of them did not know the basis of their valuation. They did not know what base was used, so whether it was land area, built area, or a mixture of the two. So these are simple things that I think just make property tax seem more complicated than it is. And I think this is an area that policymakers can focus on. And I think another thing that I want to bring just the focus here is communication, which is very critical, especially when Mujtaba Saab spoke about the fact that, it is a negotiated outcome, right? So there has to be clarity and all players have to be on board. And I think Mahnoor here is going to be talking about a project that looks at the impact of improving service delivery and its impact on willingness to pay. This was done the interventions are being done in collaboration with Excise and Taxation's local government department. And what they're doing is that they're at the time when they're at tax collection, they elicit preferences of the taxpayers, and then they earmark certain revenues for specific services, and then they also try to involve local politicians in that entire process. But I think one of the learnings has been, and sorry, Manu, I'm just going to briefly mention. This is a very important project for IGC, so something that they were just proud of. So it's one of the areas that was highlighted in this was the lack of communication on each. So even if you improve the services through the taxes that are collected, people don't know about it. So if they don't know about it, essentially that gap does not lead to an increase in tax collection. So these are certain things that also, these are certain gaps that we need to be conscious of. So I think the important point is that we need to use nudges at multiple levels. So and at all levels of the system to make the system work. So it can't be that we just focus on the administration and or on the collectors, but we don't focus on the taxpayers or even the service providers. So all of them have to be looked at together. So at the end, I just want to say that IGC is very interested in working with different policy stakeholders across provinces to, test out certain solutions. And we've been doing this where we're happy to work to fund and to connect policy stakeholders to, international experts or even local experts who can work on this. That's all from my end. Thank you.
If I may, Sheriff, Hira, thank you for raising that. And I think I have a very quick this input. The other day we were talking about it, urban unit. We've had national experiment and rich data now you can mine of voluntary compliance during COVID. Okay, when these inspectors were not getting out, and the gap between the physical sort of interaction really minimized, especially for collection. So I think it will give you some sense of voluntary compliance on various taxes in our context. So that's a good. You don't need to design a new experiment. Don't do it.
Thank you, Dr. Pracha. Sure. So after you add a point, I'm going to go to Dr. Umar Masood Saab, because everyone is talking about urban unit. So after you.
Quick comment is that when we are talking about tax, often the things get cloudy because there is an element of transfer within it as well, because the governments tend to transfer lots of benefits to the taxpayers in the form of exemptions. And this is what we see at the level of the federal government, which is called the tax expenditures, around 2 trillion, close to 30% of the revenue. So I think this is high time that the provincial governments also need to publish their tax expenditure reports, which includes the property tax, the services tax, so that the politicians actually realize that what they are missing. And this is why I'm saying, especially for the property tax, because in the case of the Capital Development Authority, where we worked together, we can see almost half of the revenue going to exemptions because of having a single unit exempted, the area, and others. Second thing, besides the nudge, what we work at the PIDE is also very important, which is called a sludge, which is basically the same as a nudge, but it is easier to manage because it is because of the government itself. You need not to create something, you just need to improve something. So having sludges taken out from the system can also bring some positive contribution. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you for writing that. And I can second that. Okay, as an academic, when I try to find these figures on property taxes at the provincial level, it's a nightmare. And let me now move to Dr. Umar Masood Saab. Umar Saab, there have been a lot of mention about using IT, and we've been thinking about digitization and that how that can help property tax collection. But I know we have been working on this initiative, which is not just about digitization. It's about how you use the data, how you go a step further, and maybe use things like satellite imagery, GIS mapping. So what's your take on urban units' role in that whole tax compliance domain, and how do you see the potential of the interventions that urban unit has facilitated? Thank you.
Okay, this is really an interesting question, because somebody should be really asking me that you have been associated with the Excise and Taxation Department for 10 years. For 10 years, and how did this thing come about, and what has been the effect of it? So usually what we always say is that initially it was under 5 billion, now it is 20 billion, but that 20 billion figure is now static for the last 4-5 years. It's not going up. So numbers are a funny thing. You can take any year to make yourself look good, and you can take a different year to make yourself look bad. The story as it goes was that this was primarily an initiative of the Chief Executive Officer of the urban unit at that time. Or the civil service at that time thought that Dr. Nasir Javed had gone bat crazy altogether. No, it's actually what happened. He said that I have decided to digitize the properties, the urban properties, and help the Excise and Taxation Department. It was primarily his initiative. Why was he able to do that? Because the urban unit had in 2013 just been transformed into a company. It had its own board. The board approved that initiative for Dr. Nasir. Dr. Nasir had enough funding from the government from other projects. He had surplus funds available, and sort of a blitzkrieg of digitization was launched. So in development theory there is the big push. So it was really a big push by one individual in a newly set up company, and he took it to a level where it was a fait accompli, and then the Excise and Taxation Department came in, because he had extended it so much that the Excise and Taxation Department was compelled that now we really need to enter into a partnership with him, and the hardware support and all the so just to give you an example, the contract for services rendered between 2013 to 17 was finalized in 2020. So we really got a reimbursements for work done in 2020 for the work which had already been done by the urban unit. So sometimes in the government, and I think I'm not thank you for your kind words about the urban unit. I don't have that many kind words about my unit myself. I myself was surprised, but anyway, so appreciation, if it is free, I'll take it. But people ask these 56 companies what they did, and I can tell you that the urban unit and it was a remarkable initiative. Nobody believed him in that time. Now, did we learn anything out of it? And that's where, after the first step, we sort of have stalled. Usually, whenever you introduce information technology, it is a dynamic process, it is iterative, it has to evolve itself. But then we sort of stalled. And the reason for that was contracts. So when we sort of negotiated the contract with them, the contract was so tightly worded that analysis or sort of a forward-looking sort of a contract in which you are more dynamic about data sharing or some type of report generation, that was never made part of the deliverable. So we were sort of stuck in a contract that we will host the data. They will use the data for billing and printing out tax notices. And if there are any changes, that would be done through the Excise and Taxation Department. So we, from a very sort of a dynamic initiative, we became basically, an agency which are hosting the Excise and Taxation UIPT data, the latest, which is 2017 year. It is from 2017. So what has happened after 2017 has happened in bits and pieces. I'm not very proud of it because their inspectors in the field kept on registering new properties. They kept on entering it into their registers, but there was no interface between the Excise and Taxation Department and the urban unit to geocode those properties. So the properties after 2017 are now split again between the Excise and Taxation Department manual or digital record or tables, but they have not been integrated with the 2017 maps of those basically properties. Now, how simple is that? It's a clear problem. It has been evident to all the secretaries, to the chief executive officer of the urban units. But then again, we drafted a contract in which we sort of never sorted out how to actually resolve this problem. So sometimes these very interesting initiative, when you try to formalize them, you perhaps are not thinking out the contract word, the contract so thoroughly. By the way, I'm a great fan of contracts, and somebody mentioned the issue of capacity of local governments. I think we've been going around the capacity of local governments since I joined the finance department in 2002. Mushtaba would remember there was a great devolution support program. I still remember $400 million. Half the civil service went on a break and got employment in that. I was rejected, so I never liked it. So anyway, that is a separate story. But this capacity building myth has still remained a myth. And last year when we were making our planning and development program, urban unit came up with certain projects to fund for itself. And the chairperson of the planning and development board at that time said, Umar, before I open the PC1, if I read the word capacity, I'm going to reject it. So you better come up with something which is concrete and substantial, but I don't want another capacity building PC1 from the urban unit. And we had to withdraw a couple of PC1s because that had the word capacity into it. But the issue is that the government has fatigued itself on the work on this issue of capacity. We are tired. I am now nearing my retirement, and we started out that we will be building our capacity. I think I had more capacity in 2002, and I have less capacity in 2024. So that's one aspect. Now, why I say that I'm a great fan of contracts, because the recent iterations for the local government law allow a provision for local governments to enter into contract with any agency. So think about it. Where capacity issues are challenging and maybe time consuming, you can still sort of enable local governments to acquire capacities through contracts. The challenge is contract design and monitoring. I think if we sort of start working on that one, for example, the Deputy Commissioner of Rajanpur once called me over the phone, and he said, I'm calling the urban unit because I've heard that you have a lot of expertise on solid waste management. So I said to him, okay, that's great. Why don't you send your focal unit in Lahore so that we can sort of interact with him? And he said, sir, you are speaking to the focal person. So, the deputy commissioner, whether we like him or not, is made to wear so many hats in the field, especially from the point of municipal services in more poor or less capacity local governments, that what they are asking is for a quicker solution. They are not asking for a training program or a new sort of batch of municipal officer planning which have been sort of trained with 21st century urban planning techniques. They are basically asking, can we enter into a contract with you as quickly as possible? I have the funds and I can make the payment. So funding is not an issue. As far as capacities are concerned and acquiring capacities are concerned, I think funding is not is not an issue. So let's think about this provision in the law for contracting as something which is very important. I think a following session is about tax administration. I can say more, but I don't want to lose my thunder. Right now. Thank you.
If I may, Shafkan, very quickly. So I would be a little careful getting too optimistic on IT interventions. They are good. There's no two ways about it. But for in this case of Punjab, a long delayed revaluation of properties happened while this IT GIS intervention was going on, and I think I would sort of really encourage you to do an attribution of what intervention was, the revaluation, or so what was the attribution of IT really? What's the IT effect in when the jump happened? Because it's so it helps you with your expectations and about the efficacy of the intervention. The interventions should happen in any case, but just a point of record. Thank you.
Thank you. We are running out of time, so and I'm sorry. I apologize to Abdul Qayyum Saab. I missed you in the last session, so I'm going to give you the last word. Being a head of Mind Lab, how do you think about the role of maybe behavioral insights about in property taxes? So over to you, whatever you want to add.
Thank you. Sorry for my because I got a call and urgent call from the office. About the Mind Lab is a good idea. It is the out-of-the-box solution for the tax collection and informing the authority, the decision maker about the regarding the tax collection. But there is still room for improvement. We need to know about the KP dynamics as well, because the merger of the districts with the KP government, the erstwhile FATA. So I think we need to more push on that area as well to get out the solution for the KP government. And the KP government, the financial position is like going weaker and weaker day by day, because the pension liability, the salary, the non-salary position is very alarming position, because down the road we will be unable to pay the pension liability of the employees as well as the debt servicing as well. So this is the high time. I think we need to have like the out-of-the-box solution to have the Mind Lab and to make it more robust as well, because the challenges we are facing right now, because we established the Mind Lab way back in 2 years, like 3 years down the road, but still we haven't did like to improve further, like to get something more robust behavioral insight, like behavioral experiment to make more revenue generated area. The second thing, we need to more coordinate this behavioral insight unit with the other authorities like the excise and taxation and like the KPRA and other areas. So we need to focus on that as well. So far we did only one experiment, and that again is not like up to the mark to get the result. We want to have like we send the SMSs to around every area, but we didn't get the required result. So this is the only challenge I think we need to more focus on the area. The third bottlenecks I think I'm feeling about the unit is that need the ownership from the government as well. because right now there is the lack of the I would say the ownership from the government side. So we need to like nudge them as well, the decision maker as well, and the politician as well. And right now the unit is, I mean, I would say is like a one person is running the unit, but there's nothing happening so robustly with the unit. So with that, I'll stop and I'll thank you to everyone. Thank you so very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Abdul Qayyum sir. This was useful, and I absolutely agree with you. I think the future round of experiments we are doing, hopefully that's going to make it easier for Mind Lab to survive as an institute.